It was interesting the other day. I was standing inside my house, and all of a sudden, I just heard just this yelling and screaming. And I looked out the back door, and here's my son, my 8-year-old son, and a couple of his buddies out on the deck. And I could tell something was wrong, and so I jumped up and I ran out there. And here I see my son, Michael, just kind of standing there, his friend standing here, and then the other friend is on the ground. And he's laying with his head to the ground, and he's got his head in his hands, and I can see blood running down his arm. And, when something like that happens, like, what's the question you ask, right? The question you ask is, well, so what happened? Tell me a story. Tell me the story. It's kind of like that. Like, anytime we have these things that go on in our life where tragedy hits, or the best laid plans fail, like, it's what we really want to know. So what happened? Tell me a story. So what are we even asking? When we say to tell your story or retell your story, what is it that we're really even asking? Some guys automatically, when it comes to telling your story, they automatically revert to, my personal testimony where I met Jesus. And I would say, yes, and I think your personal testimony, if you've met Jesus and he's changed your life, is super important. That's a super important part, maybe the most important part of your story. But that's not all your story. What we're asking for is the story of your life. The story of your life and relationships. It's the life story. It's the moments of your story that may have led you to the place where you opened your heart up to Jesus. And it's beyond that. And so as we talk together, what I want you to think about is I want you to start to think about the moments of impact in your life that have shaped you. In the Greek New Testament, there's these two words for time. There's chronos and kairos. Now, chronos is like the ticking of the clock. It's sequential ticking of time. But kairos is different. Kairos refers to moments in time. A kairos moment could be a moment in time where something happened and then everything changed. It could be a moment where something happened and it felt like time stood still. So kairos moments can be good and kairos moments can be bad. It's just that the kairos moments that involve things like pain and betrayal and hurt, they just seem to stick with us. And they seem to communicate something to us that can be extremely shaping in our lives. And so I think it's helpful when we start to think about the kairos moments of our life and how to share those as we tell our stories. It's very important for us to think of it in two ways. You see, there are two types of wounds that we receive in our life. And years ago, I read John Eldredge's book, Wild at Heart, and he talked about these two types, and he gave us these two categories. I found them to be super helpful. There's the assault, and then there's the passive wound. The assault wound and the passive wound. Now, an assault wound is kind of like that shotgun blast to the chest. It's that thing that oftentimes is directly targeted at our strength. It can be devastating. When I think about assault wounds, for me, I think about things like the angry words of an alcoholic father and how they devastate you. I think about some things like the emotional badgering that happens through an unhappy relationship. It could be the shunning of a community, or even the devastation of sexual abuse. These wounds, these assault wounds, are sometimes some of the hardest wounds to talk about. These Kairos moments have impact. They're sometimes the hardest things to talk about, but they're easy to find in our story. Oftentimes, as we look back, we start thinking through those moments. They'll just start flooding back, these moments in time where we felt that shotgun blast to the chest. Now, the passive wound is a little bit different. I think of a passive wound as more of the absence of something that I needed in my story. Now, these wounds can be sinister because sometimes it almost feels like they aren't even there. But the messages that they send our way can be equally as devastating as the assault wound. When I think of a passive wound, it could be something like the absence of a nurturing mother in your story, or a home that didn't provide safety and security for you as a kid. Passive wounds are those absences of things that I've needed, and when they come our way, when we experience them over time, again, these Kairos moments send us messages. They send us messages about who we are, about who God is, about the way the world works. One of the things that we have to think about when we start to think about identifying these moments in our story is the fact that we have to survey the environment of the home that we grew up in. You see, because most of the time, the things that stick to us and the things that cause the most impact are the wounds that were given by the people who are closest to us. Now, I'm not suggesting that we parent bash. I'm not suggesting that we pull out every wrong thing that our parents ever did and try to label that as a wound against us. Parent bashing is not the point here. That's not what we're after. But what I know is that my parents weren't perfect, and neither were yours. They all came from stories where they experienced their own Kairos moments, their own moments of impact. And so we can give lots of grace, but if we don't tell the truth, if we're not honest about the places in our life where our heart has been assaulted or where we've just lacked something, then we're not fully embracing this process, and we're not fully being honest. Telling the truth is honoring, even if sometimes the truth is hard. Some of you also might be asking, so what is the point? Why dig up old stuff? I had a guy who once said to me when we were talking about story, he said, "Can't I just let a sleeping dog lie?" And I would say you could, but in my experience, most of the time, the dogs are not sleeping. Most of what we've been through in our life that has impacted us greatly, we have taken in the messages from those things, we have mishandled them, and we spend a lifetime perfecting what it looks like for us to write our own narrative rather than to bring our stories back to what God says and what God would have us live into. Most of us simply haven't taken the time to understand the ways that our story has impacted our life. I think about the guy who shuts down emotionally when his wife gets emotional. Well, maybe he needs to consider that he grew up with a family who shut down his emotions and told him to go into his head and avoid them. Maybe you're a guy who walks on eggshells around everybody. You would never cross anyone. As a matter of fact, maybe you're a guy that has become such a people pleaser that it bugs you and it makes you feel like you're 12 years old. I would say maybe you need to consider that 12-year-old that still lives inside of you. Maybe that 12-year-old grew up in an environment where he lacked some safety and security, or maybe he lacked the affirmation of a loving father who didn't have time for him. Or maybe you're just a guy who nobody wants to cross because you use your anger to cut people off at the knees. Nobody would want to stand up to you. Have you considered that there might be some young broken place inside of you that maybe has to grasp for power and control because that was the only way you knew how to stay safe when you were a kid? We all have these places in our story. I have them, you have them. Whatever the story is, Kairos moments have certainly left an impact. So the enemy wants to use these moments from our story to communicate a message of shame to us because he knows that if we embrace that message, he can steer us off course and he can distract us from the plans and purposes that God has for us in our life. So do this for me. Think of 5 or 6 Kairos moments from your story. Moments that involved some sort of pain, some sort of betrayal, some sort of hurt. As you press in, don't think you have to take 10 steps. Just take a few steps beyond what's comfortable. I remember it was 10 years ago, I was sitting talking with a guy, and he was basically, so I don't really have a story. I got a great childhood. I don't really think I have any wounds in my life. And I asked him a couple questions, and he started kind of diving into things a little bit with his story. And pretty soon he started talking about the fact that his dad worked all the time. And so he's like, I never really get to know my dad much because, he was always at work. And then, as the time went on, sharing more, you hear little bits and pieces. And I feel like that's what I hear a lot with men. There's a lot of times where we haven't explored stuff. And so we might think we don't have any of those Kairos moments, or that, whatever doesn't kill you kind of makes you stronger. But then when you start digging in and you start really understanding the impact of these moments in our lives, we start to realize that a lot changes. When you guys think of those Kairos moments, those moments of impact from your story, what types of things start coming to mind for you?
One story that sticks out to me is really the passive wound of growing up in a family where we didn't know how to deal with feelings. We didn't know how to. It wasn't just something I learned through through my family, and I struggled with that to the point where any feeling that I had, whether good or bad or anything, really just became overwhelmed with shame because I didn't know what to do with it. So a instance I can think of, and I don't know why I did this, but I was 10 years old. I got a new BB gun for Christmas. I was excited. It was a Red Ryder, just like in the movies. And I was running around in the backyard playing War or something a few weeks later, and I fell on it and I broke the stock. So this new gun I was excited about was now broken. And rather than going and telling my parents, who I know to this day they would have been accepting and would have helped me fix it, I hid it. I immediately hid it, which was like the response of my heart. If something bad happens or if something happens at all, hide it and cover it up. And I tried to fix it myself, and I ended up, getting wood glue all over it, and it never worked. And I just think back to that, I can't say why I wasn't able to bring that forward and bring it out in the light, but that was how I dealt with a lot of things as a child and still do today.
I had a great childhood growing up. As an only child, spent a lot of time with my dad. He's a great guy. We worked on projects together. He taught me a lot of mechanical stuff. We hung out, we were buddies. So when I was about 16, when he came up to me and pulled me aside and said, I got to tell you something. Your mom and I are getting a divorce. And the world kind of stopped at that point. Because now what am I going to do? A guy that I idolize, that spends all kinds of time with me. And with that comment, it was like a gut punch. And I didn't know what to do next.
My father was an athlete, so we did a lot of things together. He was a coach, then we walked. I remember a football game that I got 15 tackles in one game, 2 interceptions, and on the 3rd interception, I dropped the ball and I was right out in the middle of everybody by myself. And my father commented to me, you know, you did good, but did you have to drop the ball out in front of everybody? And right at that point, I thought, what about all the other things I did? And I felt like the whole evening was just completely run.
Yeah, I was 12 years old, and I was sitting in a room, my own living room, and my 3 other siblings were there. My mom had called a meeting, and with an extended family member present, they gave us the news that my parents were breaking up. And after going through life, having them always promote Jesus to me, I didn't know how to respond. I felt numb. I remember vividly my sister, my older sister, she kicks the coffee table down, and I can almost still hear the bang of the coffee table hit the ground as she ran out of the room, ran out of the house. And with my other siblings' emotions, I kind of felt like I had to respond with some kind of emotion, but I couldn't feel it at the time. I didn't know what to do. Trying to figure out life as a 12-year-old anyway, and then having the fracture of knowing what I thought was family was going to change forever. So.